I think that this is where the wisdom from elders actually is incredibly helpful, is to say, discomfort is okay. Discomfort is a signal, right? And so how do we help young people understand that discomfort can actually be productive, right? And there's moments when discomfort can be unproductive, right? When you're wheel spinning and stuck in it, versus discomfort as a signal to help understand, there's something really deeper at play here that I need to sit with and contend with.
Does Gen Z have a love-hate relationship with AI chatbots?
The rise of artificial intelligence is the next industrial revolution. What happened? Okay, I struck a chord.
Earlier this year, before videos of Gen Z students booing graduation speakers for praising artificial intelligence went viral, Mashable asked YouGov to poll American adults about their chatbot use, including members of Gen Z. And it turns out that despite Gen Z's public declarations of animosity toward AI in our survey, they led every generational demographic in their heavy adoption of the technology. Only a quarter of Gen Z doesn't use chatbots at all. In fairness to the millennials, 25% of respondents in that age group also said they don't use a chatbot. But this share of non-users grew larger with every generation. A third of Gen Xers, half of baby boomers, and 3/4 of the silent generation, who are 81 years and older, say they don't interact with a chatbot. Meanwhile, nearly a quarter of Gen Z consults a chatbot multiple times a day. So what's going on here? We asked Allison Lee, head of research and development for the Rhythm Project, which is an organization that works with young people to help them reclaim and evolve human connection in the age of AI, to weigh in. Here's what she had to say. So I want to talk about a trend we saw earlier this year, where we saw young people graduating from college and graduation speakers talking about AI, and then the viral clips of them booing. And this gave people the impression that Gen Z is not about AI. But what we've seen from our survey of adults, all ages, is that Gen Z is actually leading in terms of their adoption of AI, and particularly AI chatbots. So what do you think is happening here? Does Gen Z have a love-hate relationship with AI, or something that we're not seeing going on?
I think that's true of society writ large right now, that they're having a love-hate relationship. And also just naming that, just like every other generation, Gen Z is not a monolith, right? And I think probably you've seen this reflected in your surveys, but there's a big proportion of young people who are choosing not to use AI altogether. And then there's a whole proportion of young people who are using AI in lots of different ways, right? Some of them are turning to AI, yes, for emotional supports or even for companionship, but also a whole lot that are just turning to AI as a tool. And what we're hearing in our conversations really is that there are two big tensions that our young people are grappling with, that's surfacing from our conversations. So the first is, at the macro level, they feel this tension between the ethical implications versus fear of missing out, right? That FOMO, right? They're very critically aware and discerning about AI's effects on the environment, on their job prospects, and even on their own thinking and learning. We're hearing this from young people be actually much more discerning than perhaps prior generations about the influence of technology on themselves and on society. And they find it wildly problematic, right? We're hearing that in many cases, young people are leading the charge on the sort of criticism of AI that's permeating. Yet on the other side of that, they're also saying that there's a lot of anxiety about being left behind, right? If they don't know how to use these technologies, they're afraid that they're not going to be able to keep up. They're afraid of their job prospects. So I think at the macro level, they're seeing these tensions between sort of the ethics and the FOMO, right? Mm-hmm. And yet there's a second tension, I think, on a much more personal or micro level, right? And very similarly, they're very aware of the effects of AI on their thinking and feeling, right? Many of them are reporting concerns about getting dumber or the cognitive erosion of AI, and are actually very clearly aware of the sycophancy and are quite frustrated with that, right? And they're like, what happens if an AI is glazing them all the time? This is their language, right? What does that do with their ability to navigate relationships? Yet, alongside that, the reality of their day-to-day really drive them to reach for AI when there aren't a whole lot of other alternatives that are available to them. Broadly speaking, what we're hearing is that many of the young people who say they don't have someone they can turn to that in a moment of need, that's not going to judge them, right? Or is going to think badly of them, are the ones that are most likely to reach for AI over other humans, which makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah, it does. I'm so curious too, like you've outlined these big trends. And when we surveyed people, we said, how are you using AI, right? How are you using AI chatbot, like as a tutor, as a friend, as a therapist, sounding board? What are you seeing in terms of the hallmarks of how they're actually using these tools? You did mention sort of the emotional piece, but what else are they doing with AI?
Yeah, I love that you're talking about this like snapshot in time of survey data, right? And so there is this big spectrum, but when we started to dig deeper into conversations with young people, we did some interviews with 30 young people that were talking to AI for personal supports or relationship support or advice or even for AI characters. We're learning a couple different things. The first is actually the line between using AI as a tool and AI as a personal confidant or even as a relationship is so blurry for them. Even in our most transactional group of young people, people saying that they're only talking to AI as a tool, they're using AI to write or polish texts and DMs and emails to real people. So it's reshaping their relationships, even when they say that AI is just a tool, right? And what they're finding, what we're learning from these conversations is that many young people start from a transactional purpose and then all of a sudden one day find themselves venting to it or talking to it. And in many ways, these tools are sort of designed for that slippery slope, right? I call it sort of like the omnibot phenomenon, where you might go to a bot for tutoring or homework help, and then one day you're asking it, I think my teacher is mad at me. How do I write this email back to her? And then all of a sudden you find, hey, it gave me really good advice about communicating effectively to my teacher. I just got into a fight with my cousin. What should I do about that, right? And the bot is all too happy to serve all of those needs all in one place. And so I think that is the hallmark maybe just of AI use generally, but especially for Gen Z who are turning to AI for lots of different resources and use cases. That slippery slope is becoming clearer and clearer.
I think there's important context for Gen Z too, which is that they grew up with social media and don't know any different, right? And we're seeing now some of the price that they paid for growing up in an environment where social media was the arbiter of a lot of their experiences. So how do you think that matters? Like, what do you think that set them up for? And are they using that experience to try to shape a different future for themselves when it comes to AI?
Yeah, I think there's actually four major trends that connect their predilection for social media to this AI moment. The first is actually I named it a little bit earlier. This group of young people really grew up in the era of social media, and so I think they actually have a much more savvy awareness of these tech companies and these algorithms and are actually much more critical and discerning when it comes to, oh, these tech companies are trying to make money off of engagement, or they're very aware of the way that these algorithms are shaping the way they see the world or the way that they feel about other people. And that criticality actually is an asset, right? We should be building off of that criticality and from just like a gut feeling to the what do we know about this, right? So I think that's the first is like when I think about, my generation or maybe the generations before, we were experimenting on the internet with very little discernment, very little criticality. And so thinking about this generation's built-in criticality already and awareness is something that I think we as adults should see as a positive and as an asset to build off of. The second that I see is this predilection for digital connection. So for so many young people, so much of their life, actually, their socialization is happening through texts and DMs and Instagram and social media. And so I think it's actually a very natural transfer of texting with friends primarily to build relationships to an AI interface that's predominantly chat focused. And so I think that is a very easy way to transfer their sense of intimacy or their sense of relationship building from being DMing friends that exist in real life to DMing a chatbot. So I think that's a little bit of a concern that I see for young people more than perhaps older folks. And then when you look at some of these platforms, they look very much like a DM interface, right? And for some of these social media companies, they actually have chatbots embedded into their DM platforms. So there's lots of different mixing there. The third thing that I see is what I hear young people call sort of the era of the mask machines, right? They're like, we grew up with Snapchat filters. We grew up with creating an aura for the gram, right? They're taking pictures. Everything that they do, they're hyper aware of the fact that someone's going to take a picture of it, either themselves or their friends, and potentially post it on the internet. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, they're saying, I actually don't feel a whole lot of permission to wholly just be myself, right? Be like imperfect, silly, goofy, vulnerable. I wrote about this phenomenon of young people saying that they don't dance at prom anymore. They just look cute, take the cute pictures, eat dinner, and then they leave. And when I asked why, they said, well, I don't want to dance and cut loose, because if I do, someone's going to have their phone out and they're going to take a picture of me where I look stupid, and it's going to be posted on my school's anonymous Instagram page for everybody to see, right? So this is like hyper awareness of like the ambient gaze of social media that is actually really preventing them from feeling vulnerable or imperfectly human. When we looked at our research, what we found was those same drivers of inability to be real and to be vulnerable with other people are actually the strongest predictors of high-risk AI use, like hiding your AI use or talking to AI over to humans when you're in need. We were looking at sort of the journey into talking to AI for personal and relational support. And we asked many young people who were in that relationship with AI, what was that first moment that you talked to AI about this stuff? And every single one of them talked about what I now call the gateway moment, the moment that really transitioned them from a transactional use case into a relational one. Every single one of them talked about this gateway moment that was driven in a real life moment of relational rupture, right? I got into a fight with a friend. I have a crush on somebody and I don't know what to do with it. Or I didn't get asked to homecoming. Am I unlovable or unpretty, right? There was just this real acute moment of need that they had nowhere to turn to, right? And so I think that that's been true since dawn immemorial, that teens and adolescents grapple with these moments of real need. But I think increasingly many of these are happening on social media, right? And I think social media, because of that ambient gaze that we talked about, makes many of these sort of feelings public, right? Mm-hmm. Relational rupture is public. Fear of rejection or embarrassment, incredibly public.
And I want to go back to the piece where you said young people are taking like their DMs or their text messages to the chatbot first, kind of for help. And part of me, I know other adults do this, not just Gen Z, but I think that it's probably concentrated in Gen Z for the reasons that you just described. But like, is that a bad thing to take, your text that you're going to send someone via DM or whatever to a chatbot first?
I think there's both promise and there's also peril, right? Mm-hmm. I think that I'll talk actually about the promise first, because I think that that's also something that we can think about. How do we build actively towards the positive use cases? And then I'll talk about some of the perils and risks, which may be more publicly discussed or known. So when I talk to young people who are talking to AI about their personal relationship dilemmas, I ask them this question of like, do you feel like this is actually shaping your relationships for the better or for the worse? And many of them are saying yes, with a caveat. It is actually improving their ability to repair with other people, or many of them are saying they're getting practice for things like self-awareness or perspective taking. They're like, oh, it's actually really helpful to have the practice of being able to just say what they're thinking and feeling out loud. It's like a really helpful processing tool that they're like, oh, I actually have more self-awareness now about what's really underneath the surface of what I'm feeling. And so it's really helpful to have this be a non-judgmental place for me to work out those feelings in real time that then help me understand what's really going on and show up many other young people are saying, I actually turn to AI for a so-called objective take or critical feedback on what's going on. So there was this one young man in particular was saying that like he was having arguments with his girlfriend. And so he was like talking to his AI and saying like, tell me what's really going on here. Help me understand what she's saying that I'm not seeing, so that I can actually understand what's going on. Because right now we're just yelling past each other. The reason why I say it's a caveat is because many of these same young people are saying, I started to realize when it was just agreeing with me all the time and that it was actually not giving me the objective take that I really needed. So they were hacking their way towards more frictioned experience. They're like, tell me when I'm wrong, right? Tell me, here are the ways that I'm flawed also. Here are all the facts about what's going on. Or they'll even ask their AI chatbot to take on the role of a so-called relationship therapist or a counselor so that it can give them more expert grounded and so-called objective feedback. And so I think that there's like there's promise in the way that they're using this with an asterisk, as knowing that many of these technologies were not designed for these use cases. Many of these young people are saying like, I'm going to try to hack my way into more pro-social use.
I want to ask you lastly, what in your research, when you were speaking with young people, did they tell you they needed or they wanted or they found helpful for them as they were using AI to get the most out of it?
In so many of our conversations with young people, when we ask them at the very end, like, what do you wish adults would do differently, or what they would how they would meet you in this moment differently, all of them said, I just wish adults would listen more without judging us so that we can help figure out how to navigate this moment. I think many of the young people, actually 61% of the young people that we surveyed said that their parents had never talked to them about AI. So that's an interesting sound point. That's like a majority of young people, right? And amongst the young people who said they have had conversations with their parents, the vast majority of those conversations have been about cheating and academic integrity, right? And so I think that they feel a lot of pull from educators telling them not to do it or adults telling them this is problematic, but then they hear on the news that AI is the future and they're getting sort of all swirled up in this moment. And so many of them are saying, actually, I don't need adults to have the answers to tell me what to do. I just want them to sort of help me make meaning of this moment, right? Have conversations with me where you're not going to punish me or judge me about what I'm doing, but help me figure out what I want to do at this moment, what's right for me to do in this moment, and make meaning of it.
I learned so much talking to Allison about how Gen Z uses AI. Her phrase, ancestral intelligence as the other AI, is going to stick with me. I mean, chatbots may be constantly available and ready to give advice, but they can't replace human wisdom. The other thing I'm going to remember from my conversation with Allison is this. Older adults should figure out how to show up for Gen Z. How can I be an adult that a young person trusts as much as or more than a chatbot? If you want to learn more about our survey and what adults of all ages said about their AI chatbot use, check out my story on Mashable.com.